Hey everyone, welcome back to Thirsty Thoughts on Investing. We're here to talk about fees, which is just as important to your long-term capital accumulation as the actual rate of accumulation or appreciation of your assets themselves because of the effect of compounding, as you will see as we delve into this video. So let us go ahead and share my screen. Here we are, Dents to Invest, Thirsty Thoughts on Investing, and we're here today to talk about the true cost of fees. The fees, how they compound against you over time, how they affect the rate of return on your portfolio to a massive degree, more than you might think. Fees. Okay, so fees, not the sexiest topic when it comes to investing. I mean, definitely the thing that most people fixate on is the returns over time, but actually fees are just as big of, just can affect our portfolio appreciation or accumulation rate just as much as the actual flipping returns on the investment can, given how they work against us over time and given how they affect the rate of compounding in our portfolio. So think of fees like this. It's not just the fees that you pay, it's also the gains that you miss out on because you paid those fees, whether it be historically at the very start of your investment journey, or the fact that they are continuously ongoing and consistently applying to your portfolio over time. So what do I mean by that? Let's talk about fees. Now, I've seen these as high as 3% on all deposits. I'm not naming any names. There are people out there, there are huge firms out there that charge these sorts of fees when you invest via them. You create an ISA, which they invest on your behalf. They will charge you 3% on all deposits and then 1% ongoing management fee. That is a huge chunk of your wealth that you are giving to someone who proposes to manage your portfolio on your behalf and asks for these fees. This is a serious detriment to your long-term wealth building journey. And you might be sat there thinking, big whoop, 4%. But remember, it's the fees, it's what they cost you straight up front, but it's also the gains that you miss out on subsequently because of that. And I'm going to make that point later on when I show you some graphs and give you some stats and numbers. So 4% is a flipping huge amount. Even 1-2% is still fairly significant, so you can understand what I think about 4% overall. Of course, these fees are all optional because if you choose to educate yourself and invest in, you can totally avoid these. What we're doing is comparing what you can attain in the market on average over time when you're investing on a greater than 10-year time frame versus straight up fees that a typical large financial advisory firm may charge you. So just for comparison, if we're being charged 4%, however, if we invest on our own and we know what we're doing, we can get fees as low as 0.1%. That's probably slightly stretching it, maybe like 0.2, 0.3%. Given the platform fees, inclusive of platform fees, is more likely. 0.1% is rather on the low side. But what I'm emphasizing, what I'm driving home is just how much better we can be doing should we educate ourselves and should we have knowledge in these particular subjects. These may sound low, but they actually make a huge difference to your returns. And why is that? Look at this. If I start out with $1,000 and it appreciates at a rate of 10% every year, then I will have $450,000 after 40 years. Now then, if I have a 9% rate of appreciation after this period of time, I will have $300,000. If I have an 8% rate of appreciation, I will have $200,000 after this period of time. This is over very long time frames. This is just straight up applying this consistent rate of appreciation over time. Now, in reality, in investing, we have to think about sequence risk as well. Let's not think about that for the moment. Let's keep our model really simple. Let's say it's appreciating at a consistent rate every year. Now, let's go back to our 4% fee. In our first example, our portfolio appreciates from $1,000 at a rate of 10% each year. Okay, $10,000, beg your pardon, $10,000 at a rate of 10% each year, and at the end of that period of 40 years, we'll have $450,000. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and deduct 4% from our holdings, which is happening consistently over time. We're as good as saying, actually, we're mimicking a 4% reduction in the returns in our portfolio. And you will see that we're as good as appreciating or compounding our money at 6%. And in reality, we'll only have $100,000. I say only, it's still a significant chunk of money. But when you know what you could have been, which is up here, $450,000 versus $100,000, you can see that this has had a significantly detrimental effect on your wealth building journey, and this is what we must be considerate of. Now, why does it happen? Think about it like this. If 6 is 3/5 of 10, then we might expect that if our money appreciates at 3/5 the rate that it would have done otherwise because of fees, that we would have 3/5 the amount of money. Okay, but we don't. As you can clearly see, we have much less. 3/5 of $450,000. Let's round that up to 500,000. Then we're going to have roughly $300,000 or less in this scenario, because $350,000, sorry, of $450,000, 3/5 would roughly be $300,000, $280,000, using very rough numbers. But as you can see, it's much less than that. And that's because it's the money that we're paying because of the fees, but it's also the gains that we're missing out on as well. That's the important part. And that is a hugely detrimental effect on our ability to build wealth. So actually, if it was just purely fees alone, it would be, as I say, much lower. It wouldn't be as much. But as I say, it's the gains that we've missed out on as well, which really make us understand, or allow us to understand, just how much effect a fee has in your portfolio, and just how much it can pay dividends with time if you can minimize those fees. Even getting a 1-2% reduction in fees over a huge period of time, over a very long period of time, is literally worth hundreds of thousands of pounds to you, hundreds of thousands of dollars, whichever currency you're using, maybe even millions, depending on how much is deposited in your portfolio. And that is why educating yourself and investing over huge periods of time is literally worth millions to you, because you will no longer need somebody to help you, not necessarily anyway, or at least at the very start, you can begin your journey without having anybody to help you. If you're very young, investing, you could write it on the back of a postcard what to do if you're very young. It's just the understanding that you need to actually action that information that takes a little bit of getting your head around. But once you have your head around it, the information is literally worth hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions to you, because you don't have to pay these fees. Now, as we get further in life, maybe middle-aged, just as a rough rule of thumb, i.e. close to retirement age, then at that point it can be helpful to have an advisor, because you'll need to know where to allocate your money, how to move it around. You need to understand what your goals and objectives are. But when you're younger, your objective is out and out capital appreciation. Get as much as you can so that you have either A, the ability to retire as soon as possible, or at least give yourself the option to, even if you don't want to retire, or B, you've given yourself as much of a cushion as you possibly can for your retirement age. Should anything happen to your wealth, should there be an issue, it's better to have as much as possible so that you don't run out of money when you become retired, when you become financially independent, when you become financially free, because the consequences of that are disastrous. Imagine needing to return to work when you're over 100 and you're old and frail, or having to rely on someone else. That is exactly the situation we want to avoid. Therefore, we need a cushion. And this is how we're going to do it, by reducing those fees to virtually nothing at the very start of our journey by educating ourselves. Let's talk about your ISA. Let's put it into tangible figures for those of you who have ISAs out there. £20,000 deposited into an ISA every year for 20 years. You're maxing out your ISA and appreciating at a rate of 12%. Yields £1.7 million. If you were to simply put £20,000 into a savings account with no interest for 20 years, that would be £400,000. Therefore, you have generated 1.3 million from investing your money over that period of time. Very simple model, no sequence risk, just pure capital appreciation. That's all. Sequence risk, we'll do a video on another day. But as I say, let's just keep it super simple for now and say that it's compounding 12% every year. Okay. Cool. Let's go back to the ISA analogy. £20,000 in an ISA for 20 years, appreciating at a rate of 10% a year, is 1.3 million. The difference between those two numbers is £400,000. 12% appreciation rate equals 1.7 million. 10% appreciation rate equals 1.3 million. Most of those gains come within the last 5-6 years, not in the last half of the journey, not in the last half of investing, but actually in the last 5-6 years. And that's because of compounding, which is the effect we talked about earlier, which is that, as you can see in this graph, your money actually grows exponentially towards the end because of appreciation, because of rates of return, because it's growing much quicker, as you can see on this graph, not linearly. This effect is known as compounding. It actually grows exponentially, and this is why the early fees at the start make such a huge difference, because any result, any negative effect, is effectively squared. And as we all know from math, when you square something, it basically massively amplifies it versus just simply multiplying it by the same number and over again. It actually exponentially amplifies it, and that's why we get this effect on the graph, and it's exactly the same thing. Yeah. So let's bear those ISA stats in mind. Remember, £20,000, 20 years, 12% appreciation rate, 1.7 million. £20,000, 20 years, 10% appreciation rate, 1.3 million. £400,000 is the difference between those two numbers. Can you see how that 2% cost you £400,000 over 20 years? Now we're getting an idea of how much fees truly cost you and truly cost your investing portfolio. And that is why educating yourself so that you understand how you can eliminate those fees is quite literally worth 6 to 7 figures to you over the course of a lifetime. And for anybody who's under the age of 50, 55, or certainly greater than 15 years away from retirement, the conversation can be really rather simple as to how to obtain that once you have a little bit of knowledge. Trust me. Interesting. Summary: reduce fees as much as possible. This is huge. Passive funds, we didn't really speak about passive funds too much, but passive funds versus active funds, we need to do another video on that someday. Passive funds are generally superior because of this. Active funds, what would the fees be like? 1.5%, 2% sometimes if they're very high. Passive funds, 0.1%, 0.2, 0.3, something like that. Much lower than active funds. And you can see now, you can clearly understand why that has such a significant effect, to be able to save that 1.7% fees at the start of your journey. In the analogy we just used in the ISA, 2% cost £400,000 over that period of time. Remember, it's what you're paying, it's what goes out of your bank account, but it's also the gains that it costs you as well, and that's why the effect is amplified. It's really easy just to look at how much you've been paying and think, that's not that much, but actually it's how much you could have had if that fee wouldn't have been there as well. That's how we need to look at it. The effect is a double whammy. Minimize fees. However, performance versus inflation is still the greatest factor. The rate at which your portfolio beats inflation is still the biggest factor, because inflation on average is about 3%. Market returns are about 10%-ish, depends on your portfolio, of course, but in and around 10%. So really, the rate at which your investments outpace inflation on average is about 7%. That's totally cool. Depends which source you look at, but let's go with the 7% for now. But that will obviously be reduced should we have high fees in our portfolio, and this is what we must consider. Thank you so much. Congrats to everybody who was attending today. We shall catch up next week for another Thursday Thoughts on investing.